This is Progress Culture. Progress Culture is a weekly happening where master drummer Paul F. Murphy and I share live improvised music and impromptu conversations with people from various fields and expertises about community, value, art, science, freedom, and progress for all. We are excited to share it all with you, so have a listen and see what's going on this week on Progress Culture. Now, let's get into the show. But first, let's hear some music. Everybody, Dominic Fragman here, coming to you today for this week's episode of Progress Culture with Paul Murphy from the Spirit of Innovation and Freedom, and we're doing the thing today with Brian Jordan from Jordan R&D and Tommy Luganbill, the director of the great TechPort.
It's been a while.
Yeah,
glad to be back.
It's always good to be here.
I love having you guys.
Glad to have everyone.
So sometimes we like to come at this. We usually, when we go to focus on the music, sometimes we like to focus on the music, and usually when we do that, it's just Paul and I. So today I thought it'd be interesting to invite you guys in. And what was so perfect about it was as soon as we had finished playing, Brian started to ask me something, and I said, wait, let's go do this on the thing. So...
Well, you know, the question, I'm always intrigued about music. You know, most people like music, but me, I know literally nothing about it, how it's produced. Or I played the saxophone once when I was in 6th grade, but that lasted a half a year.
Right.
So, right. But my question to you was the wide range of sounds the guitar makes. You hear all kinds of sounds. how do, like for instance, you got that hard metal sound. How do you get that out of what you have? I'm saying you play such a different range.
Can I piggyback first off, I appreciate that.
Can
I
think
piggyback that? It's cool. Sure, yeah.
As I was watching you guys play, I was noticing that when I think of someone playing the guitar, they strum it in between those two gold pieces. In my head, that's how they do it.
The gold pieces, the
frets or whatever?
The things that, on the body?
Yeah, on the body. In my head, I'm like, oh, I'm going to jam. I'm going to hit right between those.
Yeah.
But you were going above them and below them. And then you were going in the middle as well. Yeah. And I was actually thinking the exact same thing as Brian while I was watching back there. How does that? I have no clue how that works.
Yeah. So what you're picking up on though is exactly right. The differences, some of those differences, like when you say that metal sound.
Yeah.
Do you mean like actual metallic, or do you mean like
hard metal, heavy metal sound, like
heavy metal.
like Iron Man,
Yeah, sure.
That sound.
I guess there's a couple ways you could approach that, but from actual timbre and sonic manipulation, what Tommy is talking about is part of that. When you play the guitar, in between those two things, those are the pickups. They pick up the sound and amplify it. When you play like sort of in the middle of them, you get a much more round and full, warm type of sound. When you come back towards where the strings end in the body there, that's the bridge. And when you play near the bridge, it's much more high-pitched and sort of plunky. And then when you go up above them, it's sort of thinner. And so I use them all, and I think most guitar players that especially classical guitar players and stuff with their fingers, they pay a lot of attention to the different timbres of the tones that they're playing. And so that would also lead to what you're talking about with, like, how do you get it to sound like metal, even though there's no setup. Like, everything that I play is clean. I don't use any effects or any distortion or any reverb even.
Right.
And a lot of people, they use those things in their sound when they're playing the guitar.
What's your favorite finger?
What's my favorite
finger? Does each finger produce a different sound?
Well, yes. In a way, I don't know that I've ever really thought about it having a favorite finger, especially because
besides the middle,
if you favor them, then one will work better than the others, and I would need them all to work equally.
But they all make different noises.
Well, I guess if I use this finger to play a note, and I use this finger to play the same note, I won't hold it up by itself, and on through. I don't know that it particularly. There might be a small difference in the sound, but it's not so much that like that same note is going to sound that much different to you. But the thing that's interesting though is, speaking of same notes, a lot of people when they talk about music and especially Western music theory concepts of it, more modern anyway. That whole thing is modern. We talk about how there's only 12 notes in music. And there's actually it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and it repeats, but there's what's called accidentals. So that's A, B, C, D, E, F, G becomes 12 notes as opposed to just 7 because there's variations on them. But then that's said to just repeat in different registers because the frequencies are, the mathematics of it would be like, this is an A and it has a waveform that is this big when it's in this register, and when it's an A and it's in a higher register, the waveform is a fraction of the size of it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So they relate in that way. And because of that mathematical relationship, people call them the same note. I don't think of any of those things on there as the same note. I think that might lead to some of these differences in sound. Just like we talk about like treating people and ideas, we often talk about, you guys hear me harp on here about like how everything is completely different and unique. So we should spend more time not approaching things with standards, a standardization of how it works, and a common practice. We should go to each situation and treat it as a unique situation. And that's how I treat the notes on the fretboard, and even on the piano when I play the piano as well.
But like in reference to Western, that guitar is set up to, let's say, depict Western theory. Mm-hmm. However, you can play any type of music you want on the guitar, whether somebody may call it Eastern or Oriental.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
so you have very, very, very many notes on that guitar.
So it's a wide range of notes. You can make it sound like something from the Orient that you typically hear, or even say like a ukulele sound from Hawaii. And I even hear the bass there too. So you could make the bass, even though it's not a bass guitar per se. Right. So
yeah, I think it's all when I think of the things, it's a perception. So like, just because I'm not playing a bass doesn't mean I can't play a bass line.
Okay.
And just because I'm not playing multiple instruments doesn't mean that I can't try to encompass the range of an orchestra, which is what Paul does on the drums, really.
Yes.
I mean, from the lows of the contrabasses, which you find in the bass drum, on up through the mid-range tones of the toms and the snare, and the cymbals go through the highs and encompass the highs of the violins and the flutes and everything. And you're not just approaching it. I mean, I'm speaking for you, but you're not approaching it as a timekeeper.
No, definitely not. I mean, when I was young, yes, everything was a timekeeper. Although, when I was very young and first started, it wasn't about timekeeping. However, as I got older and older and listened to more and more that was presented to me, everybody was very concerned about keeping time and keeping this type of time, that type of time, and especially once you hit a certain type of music, 4/4 time. And please don't put in too many fills or don't add. Do it just like what you hear on the recording.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that was really slick and cool, but I got tired of doing it that way.
Not to like deviate from music too much, but you're talking about keeping time, and I was listening to something yesterday about how every city had their own time, like 150 years ago, like every city.
Right.
And then the railroads came along, and they were like, hey, we're tired of crashing our trains. So it's all completely relative and just made up. And so it's like you're talking about this idea of, well, you got to stick to a second or you got to stick to 2 seconds. But then at the end of the day, it's meaningless. I mean, because now, do you do that now when you're playing?
Do I do it?
Do you have to think about time and, being the timekeeper?
No, I don't think about that at all.
You just do it.
I just think about the interaction of what I'm playing myself and what I'm playing with or who I'm playing with. And I have chosen for, the last 40 years not to be concerned with playing time as time is usually defined.
But that's because you're good now. Or you were good then, but what I'm trying to say is the only reason we need time for the railroads is because people don't know how to interact with their surroundings. Like if people were truly all paying attention and talking to one another, you don't need a clock, right? Okay, we know we're interacting, but for you, now you've gotten to a level where you're so good, or both of you, where you don't need that.
Well, from my perspective, again, the lay perspective, it's not like they don't need time. At least from what I'm hearing, there's timing, but they're so good, like you said,
Right.
They know how to. I don't know.
Interweave the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But, if there were no time, I'm thinking in my mind, if you weren't paying attention to time, or at least physically.
Well, timing.
They're
They're paying attention to timing. They're not paying attention to the time.
Well, that's what I mean. Timing.
Yeah.
The timing of the music, 1, 2, the 4 count, or whatever counts. But you guys are just so good because it doesn't sound like a mess. Like if I were to play, there'd be no timing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was thinking the same thing. I would sound like I was banging on pots and pans. but they make it work.
You make it work.
As far as time is concerned, though, like the things that you guys are hitting on here are like, think about what you're saying. Every city and every person has a concept of time. They used to have each individual concepts of time. So then it's more like timing, like what you're saying. Like when we speak about time, it's a very modern, only meaning recently developed concept to mark time in these ways. And so the idea of time rather is something like when you say, man, that was right on time. You don't mean, oh, they showed up at 5:02. That's when I needed them.
Right.
Not like when they were scheduled to. You mean that the thing went down in a way that fit and worked with the things that were going down.
Sure.
Right? So that's a sense of time. Time does not have to be like this all the time. Like if I spoke to you in the way that people play music with this only all the time, you'd be like, why are you doing that to me? Why are you doing it to me like this only? You know what I mean? Like,
well, it's one of those things too. Like my wife teaches dance. She taught me dance, so we learn timing. When you see people dance a waltz, a foxtrot, it just looks effortless.
Right.
But they are keeping time. But like, so people get to the point where they're so good, they make it look easy. And even whether you're doing hip hop or modern, there's always 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever how you do it.
And but those concepts are still very much on ticked off, equally spaced.
Yes.
Whether or not it's or
So you guys must hate the metronome, right?
It's not about hating the metronome. It's about understanding what it is and what it's supposed to be doing. What's that?
It's your arch enemy, the metronome.
I mean,
and how to work within it.
It's the thing is it's the same as what we've talked about. These are things in our discipline that are the standardized parameters. They're not the actual reality of the way that things work, the way that time works, the way that sound works, the way that interaction works. A lot of what I hear people playing these days is very much locked into that mode of time, that mode of tone, tonal center, harmony. It's a very specific block of parameters that you're supposedly allowed to be freedom of expression in. But it's like me telling you, here's the list of words that you have to work with, and you can only speak from those and freely express yourself. Our expressions, especially after many, many years of many, many people utilizing those parameters, they're going to intersect.
Sure.
And they're gonna end up being very similar and maybe even the same. And I think that's part of what we're seeing, especially because we're not breaking out of those parameters often. That we're seeing lawsuits for people who are like, "Hey, that's my song."
Right.
That's actually something that I wrote, and you're like, "Well, I actually wrote this, and I've never heard your song. I didn't copy you, but because we're using the same blocks over and over again, and they're not the essential blocks. They're not the essence of time. They're not the essence of sound and harmony. They're already formed into parameters, and so you don't get to go back. Just the same way that you have to do when you're working on an engineering issue, and you might have to go back way, way down to the most simple elements before you can start to put together this other thing.
Sure.
But going back to dance, all of the different dance that you have learned about, you started and there was music and there were motions.
Right.
And the motions were set basically in time with the pulse of the music. However, as you kept going on and further, the motions became much easier to do than in the first day or first year that you were doing these dances.
Sure.
And then after that, the motions actually become an extension of yourselves
Part of you, right.
while you're on that floor. And yes, the music's flowing, but you're also flowing as well. And then there are some that have flowed for much longer and are flowing in what may be called more difficult, but really more precise. But all the way back to where it became smooth, it all of a sudden became inside of yourself, and it became much easier to do and less concentration on the music or the counting.
Right.
And then out of the clear blue somewhere over here or over there, you have someone like that I knew from New York, Alvin Ailey, that decided, well, let's take it out here. And that's being accepted now, but it's taken a while for it to be accepted.
That's a good point.
And I think that's what we're trying to do with our music, is to just do it enough and get it to a point where when people hear it, they can accept it.
And they recognize it. You've heard it enough.
They
I
can
guess we talked
recognize
about
it as
before,
well.
when
Yeah.
you hear something over and over, and you get to the point where you recognize it. I think we talked before, like, I watched a video and it talked about how a lot of the modern music isn't good, but it's not that your music, but you don't talk about a lot of the modern culture and the music. But what they've done in the music industry, they've had these marketing plans where they put this music out. It's in commercials, it's everywhere.
Right.
And you get to the point where you recognize it, and you're like, oh, I recognize that. And the next thing you know, you're doing this, but you're like, why am I doing that? Because I've heard it so many times. So I guess that's what you're saying with your music. You want to get it out there where it's recognized.
What happens when people, if I wave the magic wand and people do recognize what you guys do? Are you becoming what you are striving to not be? Like,
Not as
No,
long.
because we're not going to change what we
Right.
play.
So if it comes to a point in time when it's recognized and adopted as a sound that others have adopted, do you guys have to continue to push the boundary, or are you?
Yes.
I think that's just embedded in it for us.
When do you think that happens?
When what happens?
When it's, to Brian's point, when it's recognized. I like that word.
Well, I think it's, already happened in certain, dimensions, such as right here in TechPort.
And there are
Brian has no problems with listening to it.
Well, I make a good point to that when it's recognized. Like you guys had the intern hours, and they were interviewing. I think it was Tracy, and in the background, I'm hearing this. And I'm like, I know that, and that was Dominic's music. It got to the point where it struck a chord with my mind because I'd heard it before.
Right.
So because I'm listening to the interview, but I hear the music and it just kind of perked me up.
Right.
You take a song like I don't like, I'm not gonna mention any artists, but there's some modern songs that I don't like that my kids play all the time.
Right.
But if I'm, walking about and I hear a car driving down the road and I hear it, I'm like, I know that. That's the song my son listens to.
Right.
Because I recognize. And I guess you get to the point where it gets I think like back in the 1950s when Elvis first came out, people thought, my dad was telling me how preachers were saying, this is the devil's music. It's everywhere. And it just got to the point where people recognize rock and roll as 10 years later, it was it.
Right.
So maybe that's where your music can go to the point where
it happens. I think that the thing about the way that we play is execution and interaction.
Sure.
And together to make a composition. That way of playing is ancient, and it's a way that's sort of not completely dormant right now. There are some people that are doing it, but I think that it could be picked up as a form of other people's self-expression. So we sound like what we sound like when we do it, and they'll sound like what they sound like when they do it. And that gives you just that much more of that mindset to lock into, to not only do something that's liberating for yourself, but also that could be liberating as an example for other forms to say, hey, this is the kind of mindset that it takes that we can apply to what we're doing to push the envelope of what you're doing.
Right.
And as far as like the recognition, two things to say about that. One is there are no other musicians in this building, right? I mean, that they don't come through at this point very often, and it's not the goal to convince musicians. The idea that you, as what you would call, as you've said many times, both of you uninformed listeners or uninformed musicians, it doesn't matter if you know music. It doesn't matter if you know the discipline of something. When something is true and real and you can feel it, it's true and real and you can feel it. It doesn't matter if you have knowledge of it. And that's almost like, to me, I find those things the most enchanting. I didn't have to study up on this, and I can tell that what's happening right now is magic. And that's exciting to me.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of feel like is exciting about the fact that you guys like it. It's because there's no, this has to be explained in order for you to get it.
So we've talked about this. So that's like the idea of like the, in any industry, that's the X factor.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be, associated with the TV show. But how come some people, I don't know the answer, but how come some people are able to accept, oh yeah, they've got the X factor, but like so many people can't? I mean, why do you think that is? I struggle with this. Like, I recognize if something is good, I don't need to know diddly about music to be like, oh yeah, they're doing something extremely interesting. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I thought Paul was going to say something. I didn't want to stop him, but I definitely have a comment about it.
I not from a musical perspective, but to answer that, I think a lot of it is not peer pressure. It's not the word I want to use, but also like the masses. If you think it's good and this guy thinks it's good and this person thinks it's good, then all of a sudden a lot of other people could also think it's good, I think that's the point.
Well, I think that's still part of
Yeah.
It's part of the thing that he's putting forward. It's still why are some people like that, right? And even whether or not it requires that attention. So, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
I think that so it's part of what people it's part of the way that our civilization, society right now, we are very, very, very interested, involved in the intellectual, the ability to describe and explain to people what you're doing is sort of more important than the doing of it.
Yeah.
In other words, this idea that feeling is understanding is not dominant right now. Not feeling is understanding. The fact that you can explain it means you know something. And we're so interested in that empiricism, and that's just where we are, I think. That contributes to somebody going, whether or not they'll accept something as legit, especially if it's beyond what they knew. And if they know already, I think that it's harder for them to accept something that's outside of what they, the specialist, would know as being legitimate because they didn't know it and they're a specialist.
But it also goes to what I was saying earlier, though. If they see it in their mind as not legitimate, like in my mind, if I see your music is not legitimate, but if Paul, Dominic, and Tommy says it's legitimate, then I'm thinking in my mind something must be wrong, and I must accept it, as legitimate. So I think most people go with the masses.
That's true. Yeah.
So it takes a certain amount of people, like Tommy was saying, that what do you call it? That we talked about that graph where and then it calls it spikes.
Yeah,
that exponential spike. So many people have heard it and come to the point and say, yeah, Dominic and Paul's music is great. Then people are like, who? Wow. Well, they say it's great, then it's got to be great because Tommy said it was great.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to listen. It's one of those things. Like again, my kids' music, and I found myself singing some of it because I'm like, oh my gosh, the kids liked it, and it's kind of.
But it's also. Then this was to touch on the other thing I said. I had 2 points about, which you're like when they put these things in movies and in commercials and stuff. This is exactly like what you were just saying. Like what remember when Eric was here and he talked about how when he's doing plant walks for plant IDs, the most popular question that people go to is, what is it and how do I use it? Not how do I get to know this thing and find out more about it and develop something with it. And that is the same thing, I think, as this idea of, these people are these entities are making music for those purposes. There's a professional parameter put on them because there isn't a formula, just like anything else, where it's like, this is the best way to get people's attention. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the best method of expression that facilitates liberation and advancements of a discipline, or not even that it has to be an advancement of the discipline or anything like that. I think it's more about that imagination and that expressive element to it. And because we can go real deep with it, I believe that in this concept of infinite truths of the universe, that we all have the truth that we need to extrapolate from ourselves and pursue, and in doing so, we illuminate even more of the truths of that universe. It comes from inside. It doesn't just come from a description of what's going on. It's a production of which that is what will expand our understanding of. Expanding what can be perceived, expanding what can be conceived. When you push forward something and you show people something that's beyond what they thought was possible, it then becomes possible.
I get that.
And if all you're ever doing is trying to make the professional situation work, that's not the goal of the professional situation. The goal of the professional situation is typically to make money and put something in a utilizable role. It's not always about how you utilize it.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that because I've noticed that on television, the ads have gotten shorter, like to the 30 seconds. And instead of a lot of music, which used to be in ads, I've noticed that at the very beginning of a commercial, there's a very light but definite one phone ring. And that's because everybody is so connected to their phones that whether you're watching the television while it's on or you're just looking the other way, all of a sudden you're looking at that because you just heard
Got your
one
notification.
ring of a phone.
Like a cell phone ring or like
Yeah.
a old phone, like a ring?
Like a ring.
Really? Is it
Yes.
subliminal, you think, or you actually hear it?
No, you can hear it.
Huh.
It's
Definitely.
like, yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it now. It weaves into the narrative of the commercial.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things they talked about is with the phone companies and a lot of these websites, they have attention engineers that work with these companies, and their job is to get people's attention. And when your phone blips or beeps or whatever from Facebook or whatever social media, Twitter or whatever, you look. And so it makes sense that they would weave that into a television commercial to kind of get your attention.
Yeah.
And I never even noticed that, but you
Yeah.
know, that's really interesting.
Check it out. You'll see.
You know, it's like we talked before. It's like a hit of dopamine you get. You know, it's the same thing. You know, and it creates an addiction. You know, with your phone.
Right.
You know, because I know 4-year-olds right now that are addicted. You know, I think I told you before.
Yeah.
I got a nephew that he, without his phone, he goes into fits.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. And wow. Yeah.
And getting back to the music, the reason we play it is because we love it, and we love the music, and we love music as a whole,
Right.
all of it.
And I think that's in everybody, even though even lay people like me, you know, I think I heard a guy once say, I have no rhythm. And we would always say, if your heart beats, you have rhythm.
Right,
You know, so
right.
we have that rhythm in us that's, you know, it's
Yeah.
always there. That
Yeah.
timing, the time, you know, that
And and the rhythm of your heartbeat might not match the rhythm of
it's
mine.
not. It doesn't.
And there might be parts of the time where it syncs up, you know, and we are in the same exact rhythm. But when they're not in the same rhythm, they're still in a rhythm.
Mhm.
They're still in rhythm together,
Exactly right.
simultaneously.
Right.
So that's like the same thing as this concept of time. It doesn't always have to be that everything is in sync together, happening at the same time. Just the fact that they're happening at the same time means that they're in sync together. Whether or not it's do 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 or a you know what I mean? Like those together are going to create something.
Sure.
Now, it might not have been what you expected to hear or feel, but it's still something to be heard and felt.
Interesting.
And if you can sort of relinquish those expectations, you might find that you rather like it. And you come to understand it.
I think that's the key is, you know, letting go of the old expectations and things we're used to. You know, we have to keep an open mind with everything. You know, I think that was the biggest hurdle with music, you know, in history, you know, like rock and roll, rap, or whatever else. You know, it was all new at one point, and people, they weren't used to it.
Absolutely. I mean, that narrative, I've read a lot of histories of music, and whether it's the blues or it's jazz or it's rock or it's always, like you said, it's the devil's music.
Oh my God,
I mean, there's intervals that were completely banned by the church that you weren't allowed to use because they were considered the devil's.
What?
Yeah, there's
Oh,
something
yeah.
called a
Yeah.
tritone.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, you know, it's na 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 na, like the Simpsons. Na na na. That first two pitches of the Simpsons is called a tritone.
What was the rationale?
Well, it sounds sinister and ominous, but there's also other theories behind it about how it's the most unstable of the most dissonant and unstable of the octave structure. So it's the most wants to be somewhere else to resolve. Dun, dun, dun. It didn't sound like it should go dun, dun.
The Simpsons? Which?
The Simpsons.
Simpsons.
Yeah. Or Maria, from
West Side Story.
Leonard Bernstein, whatever it is.
West Side Story.
West Side
West
Story.
Side Story.
Huh.
Yeah. So there are
Yeah,
those
the Devil's
concepts.
Core. I have heard that. Yeah.
But either way, it's just there. That's in there. But you know what I find interesting right now is what's doing that right now that wasn't doing it before. Of course, there's dark metal and things like that are done up to be these things. Whereas with the blues and jazz, it was the sounds that were guttural and sexual and all these things that people were saying, oh, it's what people are doing. But it was new too. I don't hear necessarily anything new that people are categorizing like that. Everything new is being designed to go in the commercial.
Exactly.
And the things that aren't new in the commercials, most of it and most of the stuff. Look, I got nephews and nieces, and every single one of those movies that they put on, and they're all cover songs. They're all old songs that are being redone with digital instruments.
Yep.
It's
Exactly
not
right.
anything new, so nobody's writing new Christmas music or this or that. We're just going back to the Grinch and Peanuts, and we're going to make sequels, and we're going to write prequels, and we got 20,000 Star Wars. You know what I mean? Like, where's the new stuff?
I heard in the music industry, the way to secure your future is to record a Christmas album. Because
Or destroy it.
Well, no, like financially, because you never have to write the song. The copyrights are so old you don't have to pay for them, and every single year for the foreseeable future, someone's gonna play it.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Right.
Kenny
Yeah.
Rogers Christmas. Yeah.
Which is the ultimate sellout, but
I like
yeah.
the Aaron
Yeah.
Come home for Christmas.
I don't know what's happening right now, but
Well,
okay.
I think we've probably reached our time anyway. So,
Oh God.
no, this was really cool. I'm glad that we got an opportunity to talk about even though it wasn't about, and not that it has to be about this music, but the concept of music, because maybe perhaps now you see a little bit more of those intersections I was talking about, where like we do have those parameters,
Right.
and we do have these expectations. We do have the specialists that tell us it should be done just like this, but there's beyond that too.
Right.
And it can be very exciting and illuminating. And it might not fit what it was supposed to be, just like a lot of the other topics that we talk about.
Right.
Christmas album drops next week.
Yeah. The spirit of innovation and
Merry
freedom
Christmas.
plays Jingle Bell.
Whatever, man. Whatever works.
Well, thank you guys very much. We'll be here again next week. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Take care.
thank you all so much for being with us. We are grateful that you give us your consideration and attention. Please follow and reach out to the Spirit of Innovation and Freedom and TechPort on Facebook and YouTube, or at spiritinnovationfreedom.com and techportsomd.org, and also www.progressculture.org. Let us know what you're thinking and what you want to hear about and how you're feeling. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to see you again next week on Progress Culture. Thank you, much love, and see you soon.